Hello friends. Welcome to episode 3 of Just Jenni Lee. I hope everyone is doing well during the great blizzard of 2026. My husband is outside shoveling the driveway, snow blowing the driveway. He'll shovel the walks and he'll do some of both. And probably the back deck too. And I'm inside making art. The first part of my day though didn't go according to plan. I actually had a pretty extensive panic attack, and even though I was talking about yesterday how I will come into the studio as a space to soothe myself, to find grounding and all that sort of thing, there are times when it just isn't happening. So I thought I would talk a little bit about that and maybe tell a little bit about what actually was something I was struggling with. I'm really struggling with the idea of sharing this story. But at the same time, I'm sure there are other people who have gone through challenging situations in their life and it poses a threat to their mental health and to their anxiety. And I don't know, I don't really want people to feel bad with some of the stories I tell, as in like the individuals in my life who may have contributed in some way. Even if I have positive relationships with these individuals now, the long-term ramifications of some of the things I've experienced in my life sometimes only pop up now, and then I get like a floodgate of emotions. It doesn't make me want to say, okay, people, I can't communicate with you anymore, because we've worked hard to actually do some mending and repairing in the relationships that I have now in some of these areas of my life, and I don't want to backtrack from that. But there are times when I don't really think about what happened in the past. It's hurtful, it's painful, and I don't want to actually really give it a space. And so then I might escape to this space and not really think about it, and sometimes that works for a while, and then other times, like today, when I was sitting watching the snow, having maybe a challenging conversation with my husband, another entire thing got brought up that was so palpably just uncomfortable for me, and I just had to stay there and sit with it. And there was quite a while where I was just watching the snow come down, and we were kind of chatting and interacting, and he can be a really good support network sometimes, and sometimes my husband is I don't really know what to do with this, and I don't blame him, right? So he can sometimes pour fuel on the fire. People who want to help you in your difficult scenarios and situations, they don't necessarily intend to pour fuel on the fire, but it can happen, right? So if you're already feeling really triggered, then that can happen more. So I'm going to go into it while I work on the last little bit of color 10 here. In fact, I came into the studio eventually. I started to feel better this afternoon, and I had gotten the top here with color number 10 on the first coat done last night during a live stream. And this afternoon, when I finally got myself what I felt pulled together, I came down and did a live stream on YouTube, which was really fun. There were a bunch of people there, maybe because of the snowstorm, I don't really know, that came and hung out. And so I made it all the way to here until I realized I hadn't time-lapsed the bottom part of these tires. But I have that going over there in the corner. At least I'm going to go check before I start painting and chatting. So give me just 2 seconds. No, see, it wasn't going. And so I almost did a repeat performance of that. But anyways, so yesterday in Just Jenni Lee, I was talking about some of the coping skills that I have to manage the PTSD and all that sort of thing. And the studio is definitely one of them. But we were having kind of this really heavy moment where I started to come to terms with some things. So I'm going to tell you my story, and I'm going to see what you think. Okay, so let me tell you a story. When I was 19 and I got married. When I was in high school, I met my husband when I was 16, and so a couple years later, like I told you in my other episode, I got married. I lived by myself after high school, and I went to the community college, and I got married to my high school sweetheart. And my mom loved him so much, and she called him her number 3 son. And I was only 16 when I met him, and I was just, head over heels with my high school sweetheart. We both worked at Taco Bell, and he was just really smart and really encouraging and so nice to me. I remember his sister would laugh, and she would say to me, I want to set my timer so I don't lose track. And she would laugh and say, like, it's so funny he's nice to you, he's not nice, my friends think he's mean, etc. But anyways, it seemed like he had room in his heart to be nice to me. And he was really smart, and maybe it was just a sister-brother rivalry, because I thought he was really nice. And so we stayed together through the years, but I had to have a lot of responsibility for my brothers growing up, like way more than a normal person should have. And so I had said from the very beginning, I do not want children. I had to raise my 2 brothers, and I done my time. And that was literally my phrase. So from the time we were 16 until I was like in my early 20s, I was adamant about it. I did not want kids. I did not want kids. We got married when I was 19 and he was 20. And still several years in, people were like, oh, you're going to have kids? And I was like, nope, nope, nope. Well, at some point, I ended up deciding differently. I was actually like not conceiving, and I was going to the OBGYN and stuff like that to make sure my health and all that. And the doctor asked me, well, do you want to have children? And I don't know, I was 24 at the time, and I was like, well, yeah. And I think my husband almost fell off the chair. He was so surprised. And so I ended up taking like Clomid for a year, and we got pregnant with Naomi. So I'm gonna fast forward many, many years. So I had her in the year 2000. Now, her dad and I have been together since 1995. That's when we got married. We've been together since 1992. Forgive me. I was 16 in 1992. So we got married in 1995. So Naomi was born in 2000. And just the light of our world. The only child that we ended up having. But mind you, we were together since I was in high school, and I wanted to be educated, and I went off to college. And over time, I started feeling like motherhood wasn't enough. We were kind of homeschooling her and all this sort of thing in her earlier years, and I just felt very stifled, and I felt very lonely, and I just didn't feel fulfilled. So the art co-op came along when she was like 2 or 3 years old, and I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity to get into the community and to do things, and I started taking art classes again at different places, and I was like feeling liberated, women's lib. And over time, like, people were kind of like questioning my choices, my faith, all this stuff, and really questioning like, why was I dedicated to this and all, So I started feeling like, well, yeah, like there's more for me in this life than just this. People were like, oh, you're an amazing artist, you could do really well. And my husband was kind of insecure, and I'm like kind of like not knowing what to do with all the attention I was getting. And I was just like, I'm not into this anymore. I'm not feeling you anymore. And I ended up getting a divorce. Now, mind you, like we kind of almost grew up together, and now I'm in my 30s, and he's the one who has the computer programming degree. He's the one with a big career, and he was very, very, very hurt by this because we had been together. I was his first girlfriend ever, and so it was really hurtful to him. So, fast forward to a few weeks after that relationship ended, and we're talking 6 weeks after this. Very good boy, from a Methodist church who got perfect grades, was number 3 in his class, 170 kids, is all of a sudden like dealing with this rogue wife that he had for all these years and not knowing what to do. And 6 weeks after that, I meet up with some EMT at the part-time job at the hospital I'm working at, and it really kind of sinks Naomi's dad's hope of like getting back together, because that person and I got into a very like tumultuous 3-year long relationship that didn't end. and Naomi's dad ended up getting remarried in the midst of. Now, my relationship was tumultuous, and about 2 years after it started, I had made a phone call to Naomi's dad because this person had already been cheating on me, and it was just crazy. And about 2 years in, not quite to 2 years, it was about 22 months after I had left, I called him up weeping because he told me he'd always take my call and he'd always be there for me. And I just kind of assumed he would be, that he couldn't move on. And I called him saying I just didn't want to go on anymore. I didn't think I could, live. I was considering, darker alternatives. And I just, would he take me home? Could I come home? And he was crying and he said, I would, but I can't because I'm getting married next month. He had met somebody online maybe a year or so after I had left and had started a relationship and had been seeing them and going, traveling back and forth. And then they had kind of moved, that person had moved here to the area and was, they were pursuing the relationship and they were set to get married, and I had just been late, and I wept. I wanted to die because we had made a promise to each other, and I took it for granted. I'm not gonna lie, I did this. I took it for granted that we had promised each other that we would give each other 2 years, and I had found out that the person I was with, who I had been with since I left Naomi's dad, had a child with somebody else, and I didn't know it. And so that was what I had found out. So mind you, the child had been born, which means that person was having the affair like a full year before. And this was only less than 2 years after I had left Naomi's dad. So within a year of him and I being together, he was already impregnating other people, essentially. So that was incredibly challenging. But Naomi's dad was committed, and so I hung up the phone and I wept for a while and tried to consider my options. From that day forward, I felt despondent, and I was going to work at a bowling alley as a cocktail waitress. I was working as a waitress in a cocktail bar. That was my life. And it didn't make sense. Like my ex-husband and I had a really good life, and we had money, and we were well off, and everything was great. And I was just buying into all this women's lib stuff, right? And so anyways, I'm working as a waitress in a cocktail bar, essentially. And this guy who was one of the bowlers there, he has a heart for underdogs, and he started to notice that I was really struggling. And he seemed like a really friendly guy, but he felt bad. He'd see me crying in my car on my breaks with this relationship with this other guy, and he could hear my car was really like on the fritz, and he would say, wow, your engine sounds terrible and your brakes are bad. And he'd be outside like hanging out, in between the leagues or whatever, talking to me. And so I ended up kind of forging a friendship with this helpful stranger, I guess. Over time, the relationship with the other person just ended because he literally wouldn't stop hanging out with other people when we were supposed to be in a monogamous relationship. And this other individual kind of came into my life and initially seemed like a really good thing. And I'm not even going to say it was a bad thing. I'm not. But I will say this, he was 17 years older than me, and I was 34, or 33 or something like that. So he was 50. There was like a 16, 17 year age gap, which is kind of crazy now that I think about it. Because I'm about to be 50 and I can't imagine dating somebody 34 years old. It's so weird to me. But whatever, like, you do you. But I ended up kind of like ending the relationship with the person I was with, who was having children with other people. I think he had 4 children with 4 different women. And I finally got out of that situation with him. And that's a long, other drawn out story, but let's just say I was in the hospital for 24 days having a liver resection surgery, an emergency surgery, and he didn't come to see me one time. And so when I got out of the hospital and I went home, all the locks and the doors had been changed, and I had to call the police to be let into my house. So I took everything out of the house and left. So that was the end of that relationship, right? Because he had moved somebody else in. While I was gone, they got engaged while I was dying in the hospital. But, that's another story for another time. So anyways, I went and lived in the apartment above my parents. And I was there for about a year. That was another serendipitous situation that, again, would take longer to tell than I have in the little bit of time I have here. But I ended up staying upstairs. So I had left the church and I'd left my husband of 16 years and kind of like, flipped off my family and went and did my own thing for like 3 years. And when Naomi's dad wouldn't really take me back, then my parents had me above them. And that was really interesting because they could have been so ecstatic for me to be there. They were initially. They were so ecstatic for me to be there. But over time, this other person I met in the bowling alley, he and I kind of hooked up, right? Well, my parents didn't know him. They didn't approve. I couldn't go back to Naomi's dad. He was getting married. And this person seemed to be like an ally, essentially. And he really right supportive of all of my needs. He would fix my car and give me money and take me out to eat and give me money for Naomi and all this stuff. And he just kept saying, I'll take care of you, I'll take care of you. And it seems so beneficial. But my parents had just felt like they lost me when I left Naomi's dad, and they felt like they couldn't connect with me. Well, when I got into the relationship with the other person, the new person, unfortunately, they kind of alienated themselves from me, and I alienated myself from them. It was a two-way street, but I'm sure it was mostly on my end. I needed to be left alone. I was really hurting. I was hurting because I was really trying to mourn the loss of Naomi's dad without me knowing it. I just, I was trying to figure out, there was a nail in the coffin, essentially, with that relationship, and I had to somehow wrap my brain around it and figure out, how am I going to go on in the future now? So I latched onto this guy, and I stayed at their house the apartment above their house for about a year, while he and I were kind of in a longer distance relationship for a little while. But when I was able to, when he was local and I was able to be in a more closer relationship with him, I was spending a lot of time in his house, not gonna lie, and I wasn't always being super considerate. I wouldn't say I wasn't coming home or whatever, and they could tell, but it wasn't times when I didn't have Naomi. If I had Naomi, I was there. But the times when Nae's dad had her, then I might do whatever I want. And I was in my 30s, mind you, but my parents were getting really offended, and they didn't like that I wasn't acting like a little girl anymore, and I understand that. I feel bad for my callousness towards them. But essentially, after finally getting me back in their life, after I ran away from home and the church and everything, I literally left in the middle of the night with a handbag of stuff. I really was hurt then by the fact that when I was staying with this guy, I had finally gone back. I was back in school. I was going to school. I had no debt. I had a full-time job, and I was paying my rent every month. And after I started hanging out with this guy for a month or two, they pressured me hard to move in with him in order to have friends of theirs move into the apartment upstairs. Which that never worked out, actually, and became a real dramatic, ridiculous, crappy situation. So it wasn't even in their best interest. And I tell you all this because all I can think about is my only daughter. And we kind of had a little bit of our own struggle where she kind of disappeared for a little bit. And it was terrifying. And all I could think to myself today was, why did my parents work so hard to get me out of that apartment? Why? You finally got me back after 3 years of kind of being, in this other crazy relationship with this guy. And even though I'm dating somebody new, why not just say, take your time, do what you need to do? You're paying your rent, you're paying your bills. My parents were literally trying to push me out of there because it was so offensive to them that I wasn't, fawning all over them. And I'm gonna confess and say I was in a terrible place where that wasn't working for me. But now I have repaired my relationship with a lot of effort on everybody's part with my parents. But there was something today that kind of snapped in me that said, yeah, but why were they so quick to push you out? We have gone through a lot of other stuff, and I've come to the place of learning to forgive and love my parents kind of without them having the awareness of some of the roles that they've played that hurt my life. And again, it's not totally on them because I made a lot of bad choices and really hurt them. But all I could think about was, man, if that was my daughter, I would have been like, that's okay. Take all the time you need. We'll rent the apartment for as long as you need. Like, first of all, I was paying for it. They were not paying for it. Like, I had my own job. But I would have been like, you can date, because I would have known, like, this won't last. And the reality is, it didn't last. I am not married to that same man. If you've seen me in some of my videos, you've seen William, and he is none of the other people I've mentioned, and I don't want to name names, but the reality is the two relationships in between Naomi's dad and William were tumultuous, and the relationship I have with William isn't all perfect. Sure, I post a lot of really lovely things on social media because I do really genuinely love him and he genuinely loves me. But we both come together from highly traumatic backgrounds, and sometimes that trauma just, right? Should you just give up on that person? Should you just give up on yourself? Should you just wait for the companion that has no issues? Maybe. If you're younger, you might have that luxury. I'm 50. William's 55. We don't really have that luxury, so we have to like balance it between what is healthy, unhealthy boundaries, and what is just like letting trauma rule our lives. It's very hard to live 50 years on this planet, I think, and not have some kind of trauma happen to you. I'm not sure it's possible. Through this last week of being really sick, I just started to think about the idea that, does anybody really escape this earth unscathed? I guess, I'm sure you're gonna say, well, some people just have like ridiculously privileged lives. Yeah, but like, I've worked in facilities where people are dying and the end of their life is maybe a very horrible, unpleasant situation, and some of it has to do with how they treated people in their life, the relationships that they held. I know that passing can be a challenging thing for people who have a lot of unresolved trauma and conflict. And so I think that even people who have made it seem like they've somehow got through this existence unscathed, I just don't know. I think if you somehow do, then maybe you might be headed for the wrong side of eternity, because I think that everybody has a particular cross to bear. And I'm not saying my anxiety is my cross. I'm saying I think that everybody has got to walk through their valley of the shadow of death so that they can learn through that experience to no longer fear evil. So that's more than I thought it would be. It took longer than I thought because I was going to talk a little bit about the title of the painting. But you know what? I'll probably just save that for the next Just Jenni Lee, and we'll make that episode 4. How about that? So there I am with the first coat of color 10. It's a little darker than I would like, which kind of is a bit disappointing, but it's not the end of the world because in reality I can tweak it and paint the next coat, and then it's going to be time for Sharpie. So that's exciting. So let's just center it up so you can see it. And there we go. And if you enjoyed this, then I would really appreciate you giving me a like. And if you too are an artist, drop me a comment so I can find you. If you deal with any anxiety disorders of any sort, I want to be friends. Let's help support each other on our journey. And if you want to hang out and get notified the next time I do a post, my little art vlogs on what I'm doing creatively, or one of my Just Jenni Lees, then definitely hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you in the next video.